She's useless now, just taking up space. Candace said it slowly, enunciating every syllable like she always did when she thought I needed help reading her lips. Her voice was low but clear, drifting from the kitchen to the hallway, where I stood just out of view. I didn't move. I didn't blink. For 6 years, I'd lived in the quiet. For 6 years, they'd spoken around me, above me, and more often than not, through me. But now I could hear. Every word. Every breath. Every cruel little whisper they thought was safe. She won't even notice. Candace continued, her voice tightening with impatience. It's not like she's part of this house anymore. I know, Jared sighed. But if we tell her outright, she'll get upset. Let's just say it's temporary. She can stay at Rosewood for a few weeks while we do renovations or something. Renovations? There were no renovations. I knew that tone flat, rehearsed. It was the same voice Jared used as a teenager when he'd lie about where he'd been on a Friday night. I pressed my palm against the wall, steadying myself. Not because I was weak, because I was furious. They were planning to move me out, to a care facility, without asking. Without even pretending it was my choice. They'd made the decision for me. Like I was a package that needed rerouting. I listened as Candace poured coffee into 2 mugs, none for me, of course, and changed the subject to countertops. We'll get the quartz I showed you. Brighten the whole space. No more of her outdated taste dragging the place down. My hands were steady, but my pulse pounded in my ears. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I was fading, slipping quietly into the background like old wallpaper. But I had heard everything, and for the first time in years, I felt sharper than ever. I stepped back from the wall, walked quietly to my room, and closed the door behind me. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out the envelope I'd hidden since the day I left Dr. Mayer's office. 3 weeks earlier, I sat in the quiet sterility of Dr. Mayer's clinic, fingers clasped in my lap, watching his lips move as he spoke. Even now, I remember the way he said the words that changed everything. It's experimental, but we've seen incredible results. I nodded, not because I fully believed it would work, but because I needed to try. I couldn't keep living in that dull silence surrounded by voices I couldn't reach. The surgery was quick. A few hours under, and when I woke, the world was strange. Not loud, just different. Muffled like being underwater but alive with sound. The soft hum of the machines. The whisper of footsteps on tile. The first voice I heard was Dr. Mayer's again, this time. Faint but real. My heart swelled. He explained the protocol. The implant would improve over time, especially as the swelling subsided. But I had to be careful. No loud noises, no sudden movements, and no one could touch the device hidden discreetly beneath my hairline. I promised him complete discretion. No one knew, not Jared, not Candace, especially not Candace. Back at home, I kept the hearing aids tucked in my bra when they weren't in use, pretending to struggle with notepads and exaggerated lip movements just as I always had. They didn't notice a thing. In fact, they spoke more freely than ever. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table while they stood just feet away, talking about estate planning or streamlining household responsibilities. Candace even had the gall to start replacing furniture quietly, of course, as if my favorite armchair wasn't worth mentioning. I listened, and with each overheard word I learned more than I ever could have by asking. They thought I was fading, but I was watching, waiting, hearing everything. Last night, when Candace threw out my recipe box, said it smelled musty, I nearly stood up and screamed, but I didn't, because silence was my armor now. This morning, I woke up early, made my bed with hospital corner precision, and placed the hearing aids gently into my ears. It was time to test what I'd heard and who they really were. Candace leaned forward at breakfast, her lips wide and slow, like she was performing on stage. Do you want more? Coffee, she mouthed each word stiff and theatrical. I nodded and gave a thumbs up. Jared, seated across from me with his tablet open, didn't even look up as he pushed a notepad toward me. Write down anything you need, Mom. You know the drill. I smiled like I always did, tight, polite, silent. My hands moved across the paper. Thank you. Coffee's good. Candace took the notepad, glanced at it with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, and turned back toward the counter. Her voice dropped just low enough that they thought I couldn't hear. She's not going to make it much longer here, she muttered, fiddling with the coffee machine. It's time we start looking seriously. That place in Temecula has an opening next month. Jared sighed. You think she'll go quietly? We'll say it's temporary. Like a retreat or whatever. She won't know the difference. She can't hear half of what's going on. My hand clenched under the table. I stirred my coffee carefully, measuring my movements, my expression. I couldn't give anything away. They moved around the kitchen like I wasn't there. Candace tapping on her phone, Jared answering emails with short, clipped replies. When he did speak to me, his voice was loud and slow, as if he were explaining the rules of a game to a toddler. Mom, he said, looking directly at me. We're going out for a bit. Groceries. Be back soon. Okay. I gave another thumbs up. Then I watched them walk down the hall, talking quietly, just beyond the kitchen wall. I'll call the administrator this afternoon, Candace whispered. And you still have that power of attorney form, right? Yeah. Just need her to sign it again. For insurance purposes. She won't know. The front door shut behind them. I stood slowly and walked to the cabinet where they kept the mail bills, appointment cards, papers half stuffed and forgotten. It was time to start collecting my own files. The laundry room had always been the quietest place in the house. The sound of the dryer usually drowned out everything, but today I kept it off. I stood behind the partially open door holding my breath. Their voices drifted down the hall unguarded. If we convince her to sign the house over, we can flip it and get out of this debt, Jared said. Just tell her it's temporary. Candace replied, her tone sharp. She can't hear anyway. We'll say it's to protect the property while she's at the care facility. How long do you think we can keep this up? As long as we need. Honestly, she's barely here as it is. She just exists, like some antique no one wants to get rid of but doesn't know where to store. I didn't move. Jared sighed. We need that equity. I'm drowning with the consulting bills, and your mother still expects rent from us every month. Flip the house, pay off everything. Then we can get something of our own, Candace said. We just need her signature. A pause. I imagined them exchanging that look they thought I never saw, the shared glance that said they were aligned in this partners in quiet theft. I'll print the new power of attorney papers tonight, Jared said. Put it in the folder with her doctor's bills, Candace added. She never questions medical stuff. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my fingertips, in my ears. It was one thing to suspect another, to hear it plain as day. They weren't just taking advantage of my hearing loss. They were planning to take my home. I stepped away from the door and slipped back into the kitchen before they returned. My hands moved with practiced ease, placing their favorite mugs beside the coffee pot, laying out the notepad and pen, writing my usual warm welcome. By the time they walked in, I was smiling again. But inside, I was already drafting a plan of my own. Before William passed, he had taken care of everything. Even in the chaos of cancer and goodbyes, he'd remained precise, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I remembered sitting beside him in his study, the soft tapping of rain against the window as he signed the last version of the deed. You'll be the sole owner. He had said, sliding the papers into the folder marked Harrow House. No co-signers. No confusion. At the time, I'd thought it was a gesture of love. Now I knew it was protection. That morning, after Candace and Jared left again, another appointment they whispered about. I sat at the kitchen table and took out my old address book. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but the number was still there. I dialed it slowly, my fingers, trembling slightly more from the weight of what I was about to do than fear. "Halpern and Dunn," a young voice answered. "May I speak to Mr. Halpern?" I asked clearly and calmly. A pause. Then another voice came on, older, familiar. "Lucinda," he said. "Well, I'll be damned. I haven't heard from you in years. I need to update my will," I said, quietly. "I assume this has something to do with your boy and that wife of his," he replied. "They're trying to get me to sign things, pretending I can't understand. But William made sure the deed stayed in my name." "I remember," he said. "Smart man. You still have the file, I do. Good. I'll prepare the trust documents. You'll move the house into it. That way no one can touch it unless you say so. I also want to change the beneficiary list." He didn't ask why, just told me when to come in, what to bring, and what not to say. After I hung up, I took the manila folder from the locked drawer in my bedroom and set it on the bed. Inside was everything deed life insurance records and the original will. William had signed in ink so bold it still looked fresh. I zipped the folder shut and slipped it into my handbag. I told them I wanted to make dinner, a nice one, home cooked. To thank you both for helping me so much lately, I wrote on the notepad, sliding it across the counter. Candace beamed like I'd handed her a trophy. "That's sweet," she said, pulling a bottle of wine from her tote. "We'll open this. It's from that vineyard your mother loved, Jared." Jared raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. His briefcase was already on the table, unzipped, a neat stack of papers just peeking out. I set the table slowly, deliberately, letting them believe I was still fumbling in my silence. I served roast chicken and steamed vegetables. Candace commented on how old-fashioned it felt. I smiled. They mistook it for gratitude. Midway through dessert, Jared reached for his folder. "Just a couple forms, Mom," he said, loud and clear, mouthing each word as he pulled out a pen. "For the new insurance policy and medical release. Simple stuff." He slid the papers toward me, along with the pen capping it with a crisp click. I took the notepad and wrote, "After dinner. Let's eat first." Candace laughed lightly. She wants to savor the moment. I like that. Jared nodded and tucked the papers under his elbow. His posture relaxed again. They thought I was stalling out of confusion. I cleared the table, moved slowly, refilled their coffee. My hands. Calm, practiced. Candace scrolled on her phone. Jared glanced through his notes. They had no idea I had already signed something else. Earlier that afternoon, I'd sat in Mr. Halpern's quiet office with the new trust documents. The house was now protected ownership, transferred to a name they'd never recognize. My will updated. My assets sealed. This dinner wasn't about gratitude. It was about performance. As they talked about countertop upgrades and moving timelines, I watched them like an actress in the final act of a very old play. I rose from my chair and reached for the pen. Jared perked up, already straightening the papers. They didn't even look closely at the papers when I placed them on the table. Candace was busy swirling her coffee, a smug little smile tucked at the corners of her mouth. Jared adjusted his glasses and glanced down, long enough to see my pen move. I signed slowly, deliberately. My hand steady my face, calm. "This just makes things easier down the line," Jared said. "You know avoiding confusion. It's not about now, Mom. It's about protecting you." Candace nodded, folding her hands under her chin like she was posing for a photo. "Exactly. It's just paperwork." I pushed the pages back across the table. Jared clipped them together and slid them into his folder like a man pocketing victory. They thought they had done it, that I had handed over the house. But what I'd signed wasn't theirs to keep. The contract was a decoy drafted by Mr. Halpern, bearing official formatting but no legal weight. A placeholder. A performance piece. The real signature, the one that mattered, had been scrawled hours earlier in a law office downtown, beneath fluorescent lights, and Mr. Halpern's approving nod. That document moved the entire estate into a private trust under my control, irrevocable, protected, untouchable, and their names. Nowhere near it. I'll drop these at the notary tomorrow, Jared said, tapping the folder. I smiled faintly and lifted my mug. Candace leaned over and patted my hand. You're doing the right thing. We'll take care of everything from here. They were so confident, so sure of their win. It was almost disappointing to watch. Almost. I stood to clear the table, listening as they debated backsplash tiles and when to meet with a contractor. My footsteps didn't falter. My hands didn't shake. The deed was done, just not the one they thought. As they put on their coats and kissed my cheek goodbye, Jared paused and gave my shoulder a squeeze. You'll thank us someday. I nodded once. Then I walked them to the door, locked it behind them, and walked straight to my room, where the recorder was still running on the nightstand. They came back the next evening unannounced. Candace carried a thick envelope, more papers, no doubt, and Jared wore that expression I recognized from his childhood, overconfident just before getting caught. I invited them in with a smile and motioned to the living room. Candace started talking immediately, slowly and wide-mouthed as usual. We brought the paperwork for the bank, she said, pacing each syllable like I was a fragile doll. I nodded politely and pointed toward the kitchen, signaling coffee. Jared followed me, pulling out his phone and snapping a photo of my mail on the counter when he thought I wasn't looking. I handed them their mugs and sat down, slowly facing them both across the table. Then without ceremony, I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the hearing aids, and slid them in. It took a moment for them to register what I'd done. I heard everything I said, my voice steady and quiet. Every word. Every whisper. Candace blinked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jared froze, still holding his mug midair. His hand trembled slightly. I heard you talking about Rosewood, about the equity, about flipping this house, about forging my signature. Every conversation behind closed doors in hushed tones. I heard all of it. The silence that followed was thick and immediate. Candace set her mug down too hard. It clinked against the table, sloshing coffee onto the coaster. You've been able to hear, she asked, voice barely above a whisper. For weeks. Jared started to speak, then stopped. His mouth opened, then shut again. His color drained. I know about the power of attorney form you tried to slide in, I continued. And I know about the call to the administrator. I know exactly what you planned, Mom, Jared began. No, I said, holding up one hand. You had your chance to treat me with dignity. Instead, you treated me like an obstacle. I stood, slowly retrieved a thick envelope from the drawer, and dropped it on the table between us. Here's what I signed, I said. Their hands didn't move toward it. Their eyes didn't leave my face. And neither of them said a word as I reached for the second envelope, the one meant for the lawyer. The next morning, I walked into Halpern's office with both envelopes in my bag and my hearing aids tucked firmly in place. I handed him the signed trust paperwork, the recordings, and a short written summary of everything Candace and Jared had tried to pull. He didn't ask many questions, just listened, took notes, and gave a slow, satisfied nod as he sorted through the documentation. They underestimated you, he said. I left with everything in motion. By Friday, Jared's power of attorney was legally revoked. The financial advisor they'd quietly looped in was notified. My bank accounts were flagged for any unauthorized movement, and all digital access was reset. The trust was finalized and sealed, its assets locked down, irrevocable, and legally protected. Within the week, Halpern delivered the letters himself, one to Jared, one to Candace. A copy of the fraud complaint had been filed and time-stamped. They weren't arrested, but the language was clear. Any further attempts to manipulate my estate would be met with formal legal action. Candace called the house twice. I didn't answer. Jared showed up once, knocked 3 times, waited in the driveway for nearly an hour before finally backing out. I didn't speak to them again. The coffee mugs they'd used still sat in the dishwasher. The pen Jared had pushed toward me now lived in a drawer I'd labeled decoys. The new locks on the front door gleamed in the morning sun, and I carried the only key that mattered. They hadn't just lost access to my home. They'd lost the right to be in my trust, in my will, in my life. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. And after years of silence, years of being treated like a burden instead of a woman with memory, voice, and value, I finally felt like myself again. I opened the window in the study, let the breeze in, and placed the last document in the fireproof box William had built himself. Then I walked to the porch, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and waited for the morning sun to hit the garden bench. It's been 3 months, maybe more. The calendar above the sink still reads June, though the air outside feels different. Now crisper, calmer. The house is quiet again, but this time it's the kind of quiet I can live inside. Not the silence of being shut out, but the kind that breathes with you. Jared and Candace haven't returned. No calls, no letters, not even a stray apology. I suppose it's easier to disappear than to face the version of me they never expected. I still keep their mugs in the cabinet, not out of sentiment, but out of finality. Let them sit there untouched, a reminder of what they lost, what they gave up in their rush to control what was never theirs. Each morning, I make a fresh cup of coffee and sit on the porch with the paper. I listen, now really listen. The birds that nest in the pear tree, the neighbor's wind chimes, the distant hum of lawnmowers on Saturdays. Sounds I hadn't heard in years. Sounds I thought were gone for good. The garden has started to grow back. I cleared the beds myself, yanked out the artificial turf Candace insisted on last year, and planted herbs and wildflowers instead. It's not perfect yet, but I like that. I like watching things come back from nothing. Inside the rooms feel more like mine. I rearranged the furniture, donated half the things they brought in. I sleep with the windows open now. Sometimes I fall asleep, listening to the crickets, grateful that I still can. Ruby stops by on Sundays with sweet rolls and stories. She talks like she always did, no pity in her voice, just warmth. I don't have to pretend with her. She knows the full story. She always did. The rest of the world may never know what happened here. There will be no court date, no family confrontation posted online. But I know. I sit in the stillness with both ears open, both eyes clear, and no weight on my shoulders. And I realize for the first time in years, I am fully, wonderfully, undeniably alone.